Okay, so good morning again, everyone. Today, I want to introduce to you Dr. Candia James. She is a proud graduate of COSTAATT who taught communication and digital media with us for the past 8 years. She enjoys imparting her knowledge and expertise in the field. She's a dedicated lifelong learner, and she's very passionate about nurturing the next generation of students. So I now hand you over to Dr. James, who will be a facilitator for this business writing workshop.
Thank you, Sophia, for your introduction. Good morning, everybody, again. As Ms. Edwards said, I am Candia James. I am a proud graduate from COSTAATT, and I'm excited to share my knowledge about agendas and memos with you today. So this is going to be an interactive session, so I may be calling on some of you to respond to questions or give your perspective or opinions on things that I am sharing. All right, so my intent today is not to do all of the talking. All right, so be prepared to respond to some questions and to give your perspective as well on what is being shared today. All right, so first I'm going to start off by sharing on the topic memos. All right, so before I do so, I'm going to share my screen because I have prepared this information in PowerPoint form, so I want you to follow with me. So I'm going to share my screen with you and we will move along with this topic. Okay, great. All right, so today we're going to discuss memos, right? So what we're going to start with is defining a memo. So you will begin to know how do you describe a memo. How do you go about preparing or writing a memo? How do you format a memo and writing an informative memo? Okay, so let's jump into the memo and how do you go about describing a memo? Now, a memo is really used for internal communication within an organization. So most of you will be accustomed with business letters, right? Some of you may have never, depending on your age, may have never sent out a physical letter before. Most of you may be accustomed to emails, right? But it is an email or a letter. It's usually sent out to a wider audience. You can send out a letter to persons within the organization, and you can also send out a letter to persons, a company letter to persons outside of the organization. But that is what differentiates a memo. A memo is only used for internal communication within an organization. So at your school, if members of staff are communicating within the organization, this is one of the options they may use, and that is the memo. So it's important to first understand that a memo is only used for internal communication. So it's usually sent out to discuss, different issues regarding procedures or official business within the organization, right? Now, a memo is usually a document you send to a large group of employees. So you may send it to an entire department or everyone at the company. So as we were being introduced, right, within our department at COSTAATT, sometimes the memos are sent out to our department and we get access to the memo and we read the information from the memo. So even at your school, memos may be sent out to a certain class, to certain members of faculty, and they get access to that memo and they read the information in the memo. So it's sent out to an entire department. Now, you might need to write a memo to also inform all members of staff of anything from maybe upcoming events or to broadcast internal changes. So if there is any kind of change that is taking place within the organization, again, if you want to get that message out there to all members of staff, you can write a memo. Okay?
All
right, so now I'm going to define a memo. Now, while a memo, as I mentioned earlier, is less formal than a business letter, the language in a business memo should be very professional and polite, right? It should include any action items that you want from the recipients. Okay, so when you're writing a business letter, or most of you are accustomed to writing essays, depending on the type of essay that you're writing, the language that you use are very professional. You avoid using slang, right? You make sure that the grammar and the sentence structure and syntax and all of that is properly used in your essay. So it's that same knowledge that you transfer when you're writing a business memo. You have to make sure that this memo sounds professional. Now, why? Because remember, you're sending this memo on behalf of your organization, and this memo is going out to all members of staff, right? You want to ensure that the language used in the memo remains professional, and that helps to also safeguard the reputation of your organization, right? So it's important to remember that it is a formal document. So when you're writing this document, the language must be professional, right? And it must have a polite tone as well, all right? Now, business memo, it would be suitable for conveying certain information, right? So you can use a business memo to convey a wealth of information to staff, okay? But some of the common uses of a business memo is if there are any changes in personnel, right? So if someone is added to a department or to your organization, right, a business memo is usually sent out to alert members of staff of this change. If anyone is included or there are any additions to a team or to a department, or if there are any departures. So if someone is leaving the organization, if a member of faculty is leaving your school, right, and of course a memo may be circulated to all members, to all teachers, letting them know that one of their beloved teachers, they are leaving the school or they are retiring, and that information is shared with faculty, all right, or if there are any role changes, okay. So you also use a memo to update members of staff on any upcoming events, such as if there is a meeting or company meetings, right? If there is a shift in everyday operation or workflows, all right? These are some of the common uses of a memo. So how do you go about formatting a memo? Right? Now, the format of a memo is very straightforward. It isn't complex at all. Okay? Now, the most important thing to know in formatting is that the format should be consistent throughout the memo. So you're going to start the memo by first identifying the font that you're going to use to write this memo. Now, most memos are typewritten, right? It's very rare that you will see a memo that is handwritten. So most memos are typewritten. So the information that I'm sharing concerning formatting is really for a memo that you type up on your device, whether it is on your laptop, your desktop computer, your tab, right? This is the information that I'm sharing for the typing of a memo. So you must understand that the memo must be clear. It must have a clear and legible font. So two types of fonts that are commonly used to write a memo, it is Times New Roman and Arial, right? Now with these two, now if you go into Microsoft Word, it's very easy to find these two fonts, and you use it when you're writing your memo. And of course, you use a font that is the usual standard size, and that's 12 point. Okay, so if you're using Times New Roman, it must be 12 point. If you're using Arial, it must be 12 point as well, right? Now, when you're writing this memo now, all the text must be aligned left, okay? And the memo can be justified. So which may justify just means that you highlight the entire document and you press justify so that the left will be aligned as well as the right of the document will be aligned, okay? And this lends to the professional way in which your memo would look. Now you also use a single spacing in your memo. Now, when you're writing your paragraphs, some of you may indent the beginning of your paragraph to show that it is a new paragraph. Or if you choose not to use the indentation, what you can do is skip a line between paragraphs. And again, that indicates that it is a new paragraph, right? So it is also important to note that in between your paragraphs, you skip lines, right? And that indicates that it is a new paragraph. Within the paragraph itself, it must be single spaced, right? So your memo is single spaced. You are using a 12-point font. You are using Times New Roman, and you are skipping a line between your paragraphs to indicate that you are starting a new paragraph, right? Now, when you're writing this document, okay, you never change the margins. Don't attempt to adjust the margins. Now, sometimes what happens, I'll preface by saying this. When you are writing a memo, and depending on the organization that you are working for, sometimes there is already a document that is formatted. So you don't have to do any formatting. Everything is sent for you. All you have to do is add the relevant information, which is the introduction, the body, and conclusion to this memo. But if perhaps your organization doesn't have that stationery where they have already provided all of that details for you, and you have to write this thing from scratch, then you need to know that you're not interfering with the margins, right? When you open your Microsoft Word document and you start writing this memo from scratch, you don't interfere with the margins at all. Okay? So is everyone with me? Any questions so far? Is there anything you would like me to go over? So in your memo, the first thing you want to do is include a heading, right? So at the top of the memo, and I will be showing examples of these memos I will be showing you some examples of a memo just now, right? So at the beginning of the document, at the very top of the document, you will write the word memo or memorandum in capital letters. And this will be bold as well. So you're putting that at the top, at the very top of the page, okay? So then that is followed by date. So now we're discussing the format, what goes into the memo. So the first thing you're gonna do when you open that Microsoft Word document, right, at the top of the page, you write the word memorandum or memo. And then you include the word date as well, right? On the memo, you include the word date. So the date is usually the date when the memo is written. So if you're writing a memo today, you will use today's date, okay? And you use a consistent date format, right? Usually how we write the date is usually the 19th of October, which is the date today, 2023, right? Not October 19th, 2023. It's usually the 19th of October, 2023. So that is the date you will include in your memo. Following the date now, you will write to. And the to is really the recipient's name. That is the person to whom you are sending this document. So you need to clearly state the recipient's name and title. Now, sometimes the memo may be shared. You are sending this memo to more than one person, right? So if you are sending this memo to more than one person, again, you will include all the names of the recipients in the to area, right? And when you are writing it, you usually write out the different recipients. If there is more than one recipient, you write out the names of the different recipients in bullet form. So you're using a point form and writing out the name of the recipients. Now, there you can also CC the memo to other persons in the organization. That is optional. But following to, you also write from. Okay, and the from is from you, because you are the person who is sending out this document, right? So from, you will include your name and the title. So what you are doing is identifying yourself as the sender. So you're including your name and title. If you're writing, however, on behalf of someone, right, or on behalf of an organization, you have to make that clear in the from area as well. Okay, so let's continue our discussion on formatting a memo. You have the subject. The subject is where you provide a brief and descriptive subject line. What is this memo about, right? The subject, when I read the subject of your memo, it should give me an idea of what the entire memo is about. So think about it in terms of a thesis statement. All of you should be familiar with a thesis statement. A thesis statement is that one statement that gives the reader an idea of what your entire essay or what your entire report or whatever you're writing, what that entire document is about. Okay, so that's the similar way you would go about writing your subject, right? The subject must be attention grabbing, but also when I read it, I could get an idea as to what your memo is about, right? So the memo, the subject area, it really summarizes the memo's content. So you need to make your subject very informative and specific. Now it's supposed to be just one sentence, right? We want to limit the subject to one sentence. So that's why you need to carefully think about the subject line that you are including in your memo. All right. So after you have done this, this is called the header of your memo, where you have included, and I'm going to go over the information included in the header. After you've included the word memorandum at the top of the page, and then you have included the date used in the proper format, you have included the two-line, which indicates to whom you are sending this document or the multiple recipients receiving this document. And then you put your from line, which is from you, of course. And then following that, you have your subject line. You have now completed the first part of your memo, right? So that's all the information that is needed in the first part of your memo. So now you move in after you have completed the header. From there, you move into the more interesting part of the memo, and that is, why are you writing this memo? What's the purpose, right? And that's where the body of the memo comes in, right? So just like with any essay, you know, an essay typically has an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. That is the same process that you will take when you are writing a memo. You make sure that your memo has a good introduction, right? And all of you know that your introduction will answer the main questions, the 5 W's and the H, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? So when you read the introduction again gives you a brief overview of what the memo is about. And then you use the body now to expand on the different areas that you would have introduced the reader to in the introduction, right? So for the body of the memo, this is important to understand, right? That again, you are following the same format. You are writing an introduction, you are writing the body, and then you are writing the conclusion. So let's look now at how you will, what are the information you will include in the body of the memo. So when you are writing the body of the memo, you need to organize the content into sections or paragraphs for easy readability. Okay, you need to keep the memo very succinct. You need to keep it concise and to the point. Okay, now avoid unnecessary jargon or wordiness when you're writing this memo. So jargon is really technical language, right? And with jargon, because it's technical language, the jargon is usually specific to a particular industry or to a particular department or a particular organization. So you want to avoid using unnecessary jargon in your memo, because with each jargon that you include in your memo, you may have to take the time to explain what that means. All right. So you want to keep this memo to the point. Now, typically, a memo would usually be 1 page. And that is why you want to avoid wordiness, because you don't want this memo to bleed into 2 pages, then 3 pages, then 4 pages. And before you know it, you're writing a novel, right? So you want to keep the memo concise. Make sure that the information in your memo can fit on 1 page. Sometimes, depending on the type of memo you're writing, yes, it may go on to 2 pages, right? But typically, a memo, usually the information in a memo sticks to 1 page. And that is why it's important to make sure that when you're writing this memo, the information is concise, it's to the point, okay? Now, if you are including any kind of lists or action items in a memo, then you want to include this using bullet points, right? And of course, when you include it using a numbered list, it's easy for the reader again to follow. Okay, so you have your numbered list in it, and you may also want to include headings and subheadings. So if you're writing a longer memo, let's say that you're writing a memo and there are certain parts of the memo where you want to discuss different information. So you're writing a memo, and let's say this memo is about a change in a particular school uniform, right? Let's use a hypothetical, excuse me, let's use a hypothetical scenario. Let's say that a memo now is being sent out to members of staff, and I'm just going to use an example from one of the schools. So this is a hypothetical situation. So let's say St. Francois Girls College, right? There is the discussion about changing the school uniform, right? And a memo is sent out from the principal office to all members of faculty. So all teachers are going to be alerted about this change first. Now, if the memo, in the memo, of course, there are different sections where you will have to discuss what the school uniform is going to look like, what that attire is going to look like for male, what the attire is going to look like for the girls. So you may have one section that looks at the school uniform specific to the dress. Okay, then you may have one for the shoes. You may have one that may describe the tie that is going to be, that the new tie that is going to be implemented, right? So you would put those in sections. So when I'm reading it, I can clearly go through that memo and I see, okay, what the new dress or the new attire or the new blouse or the new skirt, what that is going to look like under attire. I read that and it gives me an understanding. Oh, it's okay, they are changing the attire, so now we're going to be wearing a particular colored skirt and a particular colored blouse. And then of course, what the tie is going to look like, if it's going to be a long hanging tie, or that kind of thing. So that's why I'm saying that when you are writing this memo, you can include headings and subheadings. And that is usually for longer memos, because it makes the information more digestible, because you're breaking up this information instead of writing all of this, cluttering a document with all of this information. And sometimes it can become wearisome when you're reading these longer documents. Okay. Now you ensure also that the information in the document is well organized. It has a logical flow from the introduction to the conclusion, right? Now in the closing, when you're finished, write the introduction, body, and conclusion, right? You will have a closing. Now, what does the closing have in it? Right now, in a typical memo, there are literally kind of 2 schools of thought on this, right? There is a school of thought that says that there should be no closing in a memo. So when you're closing a letter on email, At the bottom of the email, when you have finished including your information, at the bottom of the email, you would always include, some kind of respectful format where you say yours respectfully, yours sincerely, right? That is what you will include in the closing. However, in a memo, there is one school of thought that says you do not include that in a memo, right? And traditionally, that is what I stick to. You don't write a closing in a memo. However, recently I have noticed that I've been getting memos and some persons are including a closing, which is a polite closing where you have persons writing in yours respectfully, yours sincerely. Right? Now, what I'm making you aware of is that the traditional way of writing a memo is it does not include a closing. However, some companies may prefer a closing, right? So what you need to understand is that depending on the organization, right, the only way you will decide whether you include a closing or whether you don't include a closing is depending on the organization you work for. If you're writing this information on behalf of an organization and the standard format is that they include a closing, then you include your closing in your memo. If perhaps you are the one and you're given sole autonomy to write this thing and you want to follow the traditional way of writing your memo, then you don't need to include a closing. Right? Now, for handwritten memos, you can include a signature, right? If the memo is to be printed and signed, you leave a space for your handwritten signature above your typed name, right? In most cases, if it is a memo that is being sent electronically and that is through being shared via any particular platform, then you already have your electronic signature that is included and that is used in the memo. So let's talk a little bit now about tone and style. What is the tone and style you use in your memo? As I mentioned earlier, for this memo, you want to maintain a professional and respectful tone throughout the memo. So you want to use clear and straightforward language that is very easy to understand. You want to avoid any offensive remarks. You want to avoid slang, and you want to avoid informal language, right? You want to ensure that when you are sending this memo, you make sure and address the recipients by the appropriate titles. Okay, so you need to understand if it's being sent to a female, whether the female is Miss or Mrs., right? Then you need to know about the different titles of the persons to whom you are sending this memo. Okay, now this is important, right? Especially when you are addressing the recipient, you want to ensure that you have the person's proper title and the spelling of the accurate spelling of the person's or the person or person's names. All right. So you send that in the memo, and once you're comfortable with it, you are now adhering to the proper style format for the memo. Now, for some memos, you may include attachments. So going back to that hypothetical scenario that I used with St. Francois girls, right? There may be a little mock-up, something, a sort of diagram that shows what the new uniform looks like. And that may be attached for the memo so that faculty can get a visualization of what this new uniform looks like. And that is attached to the memo. Now, if there are any attachments included in this memo, then it has to be mentioned, right? You mention that at the end of the memo. You provide a brief description of each attachment. And why do you want to indicate that there are attachments at the end of the memo? So let's say that you send me a memo and maybe you sent attachments, maybe you sent 4 attachments, but you didn't indicate that in your memo. And in the transference of the memo to me, where I did not get any attachments. Now, because there is nothing indicating that there are attachments, I wouldn't know whether there are attachments or not. Okay, but if you follow the proper format and you send the memo and you include that there are 4 attachments and you let me know what each attachment is, a short description for each attachment. If one of the attachments is misplaced, I know for sure there are 4 attachments, one is missing. So what I can do is in turn reach out to you and let you know, hey, you sent me this memo, but it states that I'm supposed to receive 4 attachments, but I'm only seeing 3. Was it a mistake, right? So that's why it's important to include that you are sending attachments or any kind of enclosure, and you give a brief description of each attachment. Let's talk a bit about proofreading now. Now, with your memo, you always want to proofread your memo. Okay, you could proofread it, and if it's not a confidential memo where it's only for your eyes only, sometimes you may have to write a memo, and because of the information in the memo, you are the only person that can see this memo, right? Then you may be the one who will have to proofread this thing alone. But usually you want to proofread the memo to ensure that there are no spelling errors, that there are no grammatical errors, there are no punctuation errors before sending it out. Okay? What tends to happen, and this can happen to all of us sometimes when we are typing our memo in Microsoft Word, right? We are hastily typing this memo and we forgot to change the settings from American to British. So we hastily see that some of the words that we are writing, so for example, we may include the word color with a U, and the American version of color is without that U. So we go through it and we do a spell check and we just rectify all. We just accept all spell checks. So it means that now your document is spelled using the American version. Now, of course, if you send that to someone else within your organization, right, all of those words are going to show up as though they are spelling errors, right? So you want to also ensure that your memo, whatever you're using, whether it's Microsoft Word, that you are adhering to the British language. We speak standard Caribbean English, okay? And we follow the British style of spelling. So you want to ensure that that is followed and that type of spelling and language is consistent throughout the memo. You want to check it as well for any sort of typos, right? Because this can really distract the reader from focusing on the message and all they are paying attention to the copious amount of mistakes that are in your memo. So you want to make sure that this document is as professionally written as possible. Okay. So this, what you're seeing on the screen here, is the typical format of a business memo. So as I mentioned, the header, this is what you will include in the header, the date, the to, and that is the recipient's name and title, from, which is your name and title, the subject, and we remember we said the subject is similar to the thesis statement, where you write that one sentence that gives your reader an idea of what this entire memo is about. Then you write, then of course you have the body of the memo, and we stated that the body of the memo will have your introduction, your body, and your conclusion. And then you have your signature, right? So this is the main information that is included in the beginning of the memo. And when I move further down in today's discussion, you will actually see a memo and how that information is situated at the top of your memo. So let's just briefly discuss a little bit about the introduction. So as I stated earlier, in the introduction of a memo, you want to write primarily about the purpose of your memo. Why are you writing this memo, right? So the introduction really should summarize the purpose of your memo in 2 or 3 sentences. It should highlight the issue or problem and the solution you have decided to move forward with, right? So that is essentially the introduction of the memo. Simply put, the introduction will again cover the 5 W's and the H, the who, what, when, why, the 4 W's and the H, sorry, the who, what, when, where, why, how, okay? That is what you will put in the introduction of the memo. And once you have completed the introduction, you start expanding that information in the body of the memo. This is where you provide some context. This is like where you start adding on the flesh to the bones of the memo. All right, so in this section, you explain the reasons behind the memo. So for example, it could be changes in a budget, right? It could be a company restructuring, right? It could be an addition of a teacher at your school, right? It could be the retiring of a teacher, okay? It could be a student exchange program where students from a foreign country are visiting your school and members of faculty and parents are told this via a memo, right? Now, this information, it really provides the justification or the justification for any sort of changes being implemented. That is further written in a memo. So again, going back to an essay, in the introduction of your essay, right, you have identified or summarized what it is you want to include in the essay. And then in the body now, you move on to expand on the different ideas that you would have introduced in the introduction. So it's a similar format for when you are writing a memo, okay? So we remember that the body of the memo is where you really add some context, okay? In the closing, you include any information. So the closing, just as in an essay, the closing is a restating or reinforcing of the information that you want to emphasize in your document. So in the closing, it's a statement that will include any information you would like to reinforce. So are there any specific contacts readers should reach out to for questions? Or if so, you can include them there in your closing as well, right? So your closing is really a short paragraph that again re-emphasizes or restates what it is you want to leave with your reader. And of course, letting your reader know in your closing if there is any information, if they have any questions, who they can reach out to, and you provide that information in the closing of your memo. So as I mentioned earlier, this is an example of what a memo looks like. Now, if you are from an organization and the organization has its own stationery, right? What you may see before memorandum is the company's logo, right? Or and that is included as well before memorandum, right? But usually a typical memo, the standard format for a memo, it looks like this. You have the word memorandum at the top. Then you have your to, from, date, subject. And I should say that all of it is in all caps, right? And you already know what information you put in for each. And of course, you have now the introduction, body and conclusion for your memo. So again, in the introduction, you state your reasons for writing the memo. In the body, where you see as our company continues to grow, right? You provide evidence or reasons to support your opening paragraph. And then in the conclusion, right, you are telling the reader if they have any further questions. In the meantime, you are extending to your reader that you appreciate their cooperation, and you exchange those little pleasantries in the conclusion. Let's look at another example, right? When you look at this example again, you are seeing the word memo at the top of the page. And then you have the date, the to, from, and the subject. And then you have the introduction, some background information, the overview and timeline. This is a longer memo, right? So this person will include an overview or timeline because, again, it all depends on the subject matter of the memo. So for the subject matter, of course, one of the subheadings will be overview and timeline, and then you have the closing. So these are some information in terms of formatting tips that you will need to know. There is no salutation. You don't start a memo with the usual dear, right? When you're writing a letter or an email, you usually start with dear Miss So-and-so, dear Mr. So-and-so, right? You don't start a memo with any salutation. As I mentioned earlier, you don't usually include a closing in your memo, so you want to omit the courtesies such as yours respectfully, yours sincerely, right? And in memos now, the traditional way is that there isn't usually an area for a signature. So there's usually no signature block. Now, I know I mentioned including a signature earlier. There are some memos where it is signed by the author of the memo, and that's fine. But again, the traditional way is that it doesn't usually carry a signature. Okay? So for your memo, you want to use the full block format. And the full block format is usually where the entire document is, the entire document of your memo is justified, right? So it is aligned on the left hand and the right hand side. You may not, depending on the type of memo that you're writing, you may not have to include headings, all right? There is usually single spacing between paragraphs, and that is important to remember. And again, this is what your memo would look like when you include information. So this is a memo, and it has the date, to, from, subject. And you notice there is no dear so-and-so. So the memo starts immediately with the introduction. And this is, of course, to inform all employees at this particular organization that over the next few weeks, the kitchen area will be under construction for remodeling. So if you look at this memo, when you read the introduction is one sentence, and it tells you in that one sentence what the entire memo is about, right? So it's essentially informing people, stay away from the kitchen area because we are remodeling this place and it's under construction, right? So when you read that one sentence, it tells you what the entire memo is about. Then, of course, in the body now, you add a little meat to it. So you continue to tell staff that as the company continues to grow, it has become necessary to provide more communal dining space, and that they are grateful to the facility team for their hard work. And you get into the conclusion. Now, if you have any questions regarding the model, you can access the full report, and they have sent them the full report. In the meantime, we are sorry for the inconvenience. And they let them know in the memo as well that between the weeks of December 1 to December 31st, right, the kitchen is off limits, right? And of course, letting them know if they want to use a kitchen, they can use the second floor. So you see how simple and straightforward this memo is. It doesn't have to be anything too technical or anything too long, right? And this is the type of memos these are the types of memos that are usually sent out. Okay, and then I want you to pay attention to the closing. You notice there is no yours respectfully, yours sincerely. It just ends the memo by saying thank you for your cooperation. And that's it. All right, let's look at another example. So again, this is your sample memo. And you have the date, you have the to, the from, and the subject line. And that is usually in the header. You include that. And then you start now with the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. So again, remember that there is no salutation that is used in a memo. Once you have included your subject line, you start your memo with the introduction. You don't have to put dear anyone. You just jump into the introduction of your memo. Then you write your body, you write your conclusion, and you avoid any closings. So you don't have to include yours sincerely. You don't have to include yours respectfully. All right. And once you have written once you have written the conclusion for your memo, you have completed the writing of your memo. So this brings us to the end of our discussion on writing a memo. Okay, so here is where it becomes interesting, and I'm going to now call on you and ask you some questions to see if you were listening or if you were following on what I was saying. I know I've done most of the talking so far, so I'm going to call on you and ask a question, and you can respond. Okay, how does that sound? Good?
Yes, miss.
All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. All right. So let's hear from someone from Palo Seco Secondary. What is the first thing you include at the top of your document? What is the first word, I should say, that you include at the top of your document when you are writing your memo? What's the first word? Anybody from Palo Seco Secondary?
Miss Memorandum.
Memorandum. Excellent. So the first word you include at the top of that document is memorandum. Excellent. Thanks, Palo Seco. All right. So now we're going to hear from someone from St. Francois Girls. Do you, if I am writing a memo and I start my memo with Dear Mrs. Edwards, am I starting my memo correctly? Anybody from St. Francois Girls? I've started my memo and I'm writing Dear Mrs. Edwards. I'm sending my memo to Mrs. Edwards Knox, right? And I start my memo with Dear Mrs. Edwards. Am I writing this thing correct? St. Francois Girls?
Why?
Miss
Go ahead.
Jane, you're starting it wrong.
I'm starting it wrong. Why?
Miss, because you're not supposed to start it with salutation.
Exactly. Excellent. So you're not supposed to start your memo with any kind of salutations, right? So you leave out the dear and the hi and the hello. Good. So you guys were listening. So more questions. At the very header, right? Before I even start my introduction, okay? At the header of in the header of the memo, there is some information I need to include, right? In the header of this memo, before I even start writing my introduction, I have included, according to Palo Seco Secondary, at the very top of my memo, I have included the word memorandum, right? Under memorandum now, I have to include the header. What is one piece of information I will include in my header? Just one. Let me call on Faith. Is it Faith Dookie? Are you a teacher or are you one of the participants? I just want to make sure. Faith?
Miss Faith?
Yes. So in the header of this document that I'm writing, what is one piece of information I will want to include in the header of my memo? Did you hear the question, Faith? Okay, maybe Faith is having some technical difficulties. I'm going to move on to Vanessa. Vanessa, can you identify one piece of information you will include in the header of your memo?
Message date.
The date, yes. Excellent. So you include the date and you include the day the memo is written. So that's the day's date. All right. Excellent. All right. So let's hear from Sharon. Sharon, what is another piece of information you will include in the header? So Vanessa already stated the date. What's another piece of information? I'm not hearing you. All right, Tariq.
Is it Sharona?
Or Sharona? Yes, Sharona, do you want to answer the question?
Miss, I was just asking because it's Sharona.
That's okay, right? I can call on you, Sharona. Do you want to answer the question?
Miss, can you repeat the question, please?
So there are some information that you include in the header of the memo. So under memorandum, we have already identified that we will include the date. What is another piece of information you will include in the header other than the date?
The subject?
The subject, yes, excellent. So you will include the subject in the header. Anyone else? Let's hear from Tariq. What other information will you include in the header of your memo?
Miss, to or from.
To or from, excellent. So you see, we are now composing our header. So far we have the date, we have to or from, and we have the subject. So we have now composed the header of our memo. So once you have composed your header, you know now that you can move into the body of your memo, right? So let me ask this. I have written my memo. I have started my memo. I have included the word memorandum at the top. I have included in the header the to, the date, the subject, the from. Okay, and I'm satisfied with the way that looks. I have written my introduction. I have written my body, and I've written the conclusion. Now, should I go ahead and include a closing? What kind of closing should I include? Maybe I should include something like yours respectfully, because that sounds a lot more professional, right? So I'm going ahead and include yours respectfully and put a nice little signature. right? Isn't that the way you conclude a memo? Yes or no? Is that the way you conclude a memo?
Miss.
Camelia, can you repeat your answer?
No, miss.
No. Why no, Camelia?
Miss, because they don't include signatures.
Right, because you don't include a closing in a memo, right? You leave the closing out. So once you have completed your introduction, once you have completed your body, once you have completed your conclusion, then you have written your memo, okay? And because you have written your memo, you are satisfied that you have successfully written a document that looks pretty good. So before we move on to the writing of an agenda, right, I just want to give you guys a little assignment to do. Now, I will put you all, because it's not much of you, I won't put you guys into breakout rooms because there are some schools together, and I will just let you all work on this assignment individually. So what you're going to do, so what I want to do now, I have discussed with you the formatting for a memo, right? So you all should have a better understanding of how you go about writing a memo and how you format your memo, right? You should have an understanding of what you will include in the introduction of your memo. First of all, what you will include in the header of your memo, what you will include in the introduction, what you will include in the body, and of course in the conclusion. Now remember, your memo doesn't have to be a very long document because it is a memo with information that is straight to the point. You get straight to the point of the reason why you are writing the memo. The body of the memo, it is where you add some more context. And again, the context that you are providing is usually to the point. And of course, you have your conclusion, and that is the way you end your memo. All right. So what I want to do now is give you an exercise where you get the opportunity to write your own memo. Now I will present you with a scenario, and you take some time and you brainstorm and you come up with the information for this memo. Okay, and then we will present you will get the opportunity to present your memo later on in the workshop. All right, so what I'm going to do now is share my screen with you again, and you will see the instructions for the writing of your memo. So this is a scenario. All right, I tried to make it as specific as possible to you all as students. So most schools have a student council, right? So you're in secondary school and you're a member of the student council at your school. And the next council meeting is just about a week away. So one of the main agenda items that you want to discuss at this next council meeting is to plan a charity event that the council has decided to organize. So your task is to write a memo to all your fellow council students, members, and provide some initial ideas for the charity. So you are putting forward some initial ideas. Essentially, what you're trying to do is get people prepared to come to this meeting to sort of brainstorm and contribute ideas to this planned charity event. So instead of waiting until the actual day of the meeting to tell persons about this planned charity event, and then, you know, everybody is trying to come up with ideas on the day, What you're doing is setting the pace. You're sort of being proactive. So what you are doing, you are writing this memo to your fellow student council members, and you are initiating some ideas for the charity event. So the true purpose of the memo is really to get the brainstorming process started and set the stage for the discussion at the meeting. So you are writing to the student council members, right? And you're telling them about this planned charity event, and included in the memo, you are putting forward some initial ideas about what can possibly take place for the event. So for the memo content, these are some ideas that will guide you through the writing of your memo. You want to start, of course, by introducing yourself as the member of the student council. You want to provide a clear and engaging subject line for the memo. Remember, we said that the subject line is that one sentence that gives an entire summary of what the memo is about. You want to share your thoughts on the charity event, including some potential themes, some goals, and some target audiences, right? You want to suggest some preliminary ideas for the event, such as types of activities, venues, or fundraising strategies. And you want to also encourage your fellow council members to brainstorm and add their ideas to the discussion during the meeting. So mention the date, time, and location of the upcoming student council meeting, and conclude the memo by expressing your enthusiasm for working together to make the charity event a success, right? So in writing this memo, you will notice that, I mean, it sounds like a lot of information, but actually it's not. You just have to remember that with this memo, the main point of the memo is that you are writing to discuss this charity event, okay? And you are the one proposing the ideas, the initial ideas for this event. So you're proposing some ideas about, you know, the types of activities that you guys can have. And you don't have to list a bunch, just maybe one or two, you know, to get the ball rolling. You can suggest a venue as well, right? So I want you guys to work on this particular scenario. What I will do is give you, let me see, probably 20 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes to work on your own memo. Remember the formatting that we discussed, ensuring that you have memo at the top, you have your header, and then of course, you start your memo with an introduction, the body, and the conclusion. And I want you to make a concerted effort to keep this information to one page. Don't go over onto 2 pages. Condense this information and keep it on 1 page. All right? So how does that sound? Is it doable? Yes? No? I'm just going to call on someone. Faith, how does the assignment sound?
Yes, it sounds okay.
Okay, good. So Faith says the assignment sounds good. So which means I'm going to let Faith be the voice for everyone. All right, so you can start working on your memo. I am here. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know if you have any questions, right? Let me just ask a question. Miss Edwards, can I put them in breakout rooms? I don't know if that would be feasible.
You can. You
Okay.
absolutely can, yes.
All right. So what I'm going to do is put you all in some breakout rooms in order for you guys to work together as a team on this particular assignment.
Dr. James, I just made you the host so that you can do all that you need to do. In the meantime, I will pause the recording while you are doing this. I think I should still be able to pause it.
Okay, great. So I'm adding them to breakout rooms now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so welcome back, everyone. So I saw that you were all busy working on your memo. and some of you were able to insert the header of the memo. Some of you were able to start working on the introduction. So what I want to do now is continue our discussions. I'm specifically going to discuss the agenda with you all. After my discussion on the agenda, I will give you another opportunity to continue working on the memo. And following that, I will give you all a chance to share the contents of your memo with everyone. All right. So before I do so, before I start my discussion on agenda, what I want to share with you is that there are a number of courses offered at COSTAATT, and these courses are very interesting. So we want to encourage you to visit our website. It is listed in the chat, www.costatt.edu.tt, and it gives you a better insight to the range of courses offered at COSTAATT, and you can use the website to navigate and look at the different courses and see which of the courses pique your interest. All right. So let's continue our discussion today. So we are going to discuss the agenda now, right? So why are we having a discussion about an agenda? So many times, sometimes we attend a meeting, and because there is no agenda, the meeting tends to run late. The meeting sometimes is disorganized in the sense that speakers don't know when it's their turn to speak. And then there are some speakers who may speak for a lengthy time and take away time from other speakers, and that lends to a lot of confusion in terms of how one will conduct a meeting, right? So it's important to have an agenda for most formal meetings. The agenda is that document that keeps everything running on time and keeps everything organized, right? So the agenda that I'm going to discuss is specific to a meeting. All right. So what I'm going to do again is share my screen with you, and we will start our discussion on the agenda. Okay. So let me share my screen. All right. So what we're discussing, as I mentioned earlier, is the agenda. All right. And the purpose of this discussion is how do you go about writing an agenda, right? So let's look at the meeting agenda. Right now, there are many reasons why meetings are sometimes unproductive and frustrating. And one common cause is because there is a lack of an agenda, right? You attend the meeting and the meeting starts late, or it runs way over time, or speakers don't know when it is their turn to speak, or some speakers may take up time from another speaker. So these meetings can be frustrating sometimes, right? But one document that one can use to sort of circumvent all of those issues is an agenda, right? So what is an agenda? A meeting agenda is simply an outline that dictates what a meeting is about and the timeline that the meeting will follow, right? So the most important part of the agenda is that timeline, right? Because that timeline guides the way the meeting unfolds. And if everyone sticks to the timeline, then you tend to have a productive meeting and everyone is given the opportunity to share information within their time frame. So a meeting agenda is meant to keep meetings on topic, efficient, and goal-oriented, because you call a meeting really to accomplish a goal, right? So going back to the exercise for the agenda, for the memo, that you are writing. Let's say that you as the person, you as the member of the student council decided to call a meeting, right? You are calling that meeting because you have a particular goal you want to achieve. What is the goal? According to the assignment, the goal is to discuss the upcoming charity event, for everyone to put forward ideas so that the planning of the charity event can start. So that is the primary goal of that meeting, and you want to be able to accomplish that goal at the end of the meeting. So in order for you to do so, that's why you create an agenda, right? So the meeting, so the agenda again helps to keep your meeting goal oriented. It helps to keep it on topic. So persons who are coming to the meeting, they are aware beforehand, right, what the meeting is going to be about. We are only going to discuss this specific issue, and that is what we want to accomplish by the end of the meeting, right? So that is one of the reasons why you write an agenda. So the agenda is really an outline of what will occur during the meeting. And this might include topics such as the goal of the meeting, a timeline, who are the designated speakers, right? Any supporting documents that may be shared during the meeting, or any talking points. Now, a meeting agenda is usually shared with all participants before the meeting so they can prepare. So the rule is, when you write an agenda, you want people coming to the meeting to share on this particular topic. So the rule is really that you send the agenda out probably 24 hours before to the participants, right? The people who you have invited to the meeting, you send out a copy of the agenda, and they will now see what the meeting is about, who are the persons speaking in at this meeting, and it provides all of that information. So when they are going into the meeting, they're going into this meeting well informed. All right. So that is why you send out the meeting agenda approximately 24 hours before. So a meeting agenda can be used before a meeting to set expectations and prepare, right? So I get a copy of the agenda, I read through the agenda, and I already know who are the persons speaking. I know what time frame they are speaking for. I know the length of the meeting, so I can make preparations for myself. So I know what time the meeting is scheduled to start. I know approximately what time the meeting ends. I know the different topics that are going to be covered in the meeting, right? So it sets expectations on me, and it gives me an opportunity to prepare for this meeting as well, just in case I have any questions, right? Now, during a meeting, an agenda creates structure. It helps to save time and maintain focus. After a meeting, an agenda can be used to recap the meeting or the relevant, recap the meeting or to draft the minutes. Okay, so going into the topic of minutes, that's for another discussion, but sometimes the meeting agenda can be used again to give someone who probably missed the meeting an idea of what the meeting was about, because you have all of the main information in that agenda, and you can give it to someone and give them a kind of recap of what the meeting was about, right? Using the agenda as a guideline. So here are some of the benefits of using a meeting agenda. It gives the meeting a clear purpose. So we all know when we are attending this meeting, what is the real purpose of this meeting. It helps you to stay on track, right? So that no one is monopolizing the meeting. No one person is monopolizing this meeting. In the meeting, there are some participants who may not be very forthcoming, or they may be a little bit more reserved in the way they share information. So you want to ensure that in your agenda, you're aware of this and you can allot a certain time frame for that person who may be more reserved to get the opportunity to share their ideas in the meeting, right? It helps define responsibilities. It gives a structure and allows you to manage your time efficiently. So if I know that I'm only supposed to speak for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, then I know that within that time frame, I have to share everything that I have to share within that 5 or 10 minutes, right? So it helps to keep everything on track. It ensures essential topics are covered. Now, this is important because sometimes you attend a meeting and everything is discussed besides the real topic for the meeting, right? And before you know it, time has passed and you have discussed everything else but the actual topic. So when you have an agenda, it helps to avoid that you stick to the essential topics that has to be covered. It helps in creating one clarifies expectations and responsibilities. It reduces wasted time and sending the agenda in advance. As mentioned earlier, it prepares participants. So if you want to stay on track, if you want to save time, if you want to accomplish a specific goal during your meeting, then an agenda is the best tool for accomplishing that, right? So we're talking about the agenda. Let's have a discussion now on what you include in a meeting agenda. So in a meeting agenda, it should clearly state the purpose of the meeting. Some meeting agendas may be more detailed than others. So for example, not all meetings need time allotments for topics or supporting documents. However, a more detailed agenda, the more detailed an agenda, the easier it is to stay on topic. I would suggest that when writing an agenda, you include time frames. It helps each speaker to stay on track. Without those time frames, some speakers may tend to speak longer than others, and then that throws off the timing of the meeting. So establish time frames for each speaker. All right. Now, an excellent meeting agenda will include, of course, the theme of the meeting goals, a list of topics, estimated time allotments for each topic and supporting documents, time for free discussion and a final overview, right? So when you're writing this meeting agenda, you want to consider all the attendees and the goal you want to achieve. So here is how you write a meeting agenda. So this is your preparation. You're getting ready to write your meeting agenda, and these are the things you need to put in place first. So before you begin writing your meeting agenda, take time to consider what you want out of the meeting. What is the theme of your meeting? And having a theme, that helps to specify the type of meeting, and it will determine also the focus of the meeting. So here are some common themes, right? The example I gave you guys earlier for the memo, the theme of that meeting would be a student council meeting, right? So you know that it's a meeting for members of the student council, and that is your theme, right? There are also other meetings where it's a team meeting. Maybe you are part of some sports team or other team, and you can have a team meeting and it's really a discussion about a project status or resolving any issues or scheduling important deadlines. Then you have board meetings, which we are all familiar with because we have heard of board meetings before, and it's a formal discussion of business matters. You have a committee meeting, right? And then, of course, you have the PTA meeting, which is the Parent Teacher Association meeting. So there are different types of meetings that you can have, but that is what you have to start off first deciding. What is the theme of this meeting, right? Is it a board meeting? Is it a PTA meeting? Is it a student council meeting? Is it a meeting for just prefects, right? you have to decide what is the theme of the meeting. And once you have initially decided that, then you can continue the preparation phase. Okay. Now, after you have decided the theme, then why are you having this meeting? Why are you calling together the members of the student council? So you have to now decide on a topic that is going to be discussed during the meeting. So in order to come up with a topic, you have to check in on the members, right? Check in with your teammates, your fellow board members, and that is how you come up with a team. Or in the case of the example, right, one of the members of the student council knew that all the other members were thinking about planning and having a charity event, right? So that's the theme right there. The theme of that particular meeting would be the planning of the upcoming charity event. So here you are now laser focused because you know that for the topic of your meeting is going to be that discussion about the charity event. And you want to stay focused on that to ensure that the goal is accomplished at the end of the meeting, right? So next thing you want to do after you have decided on a topic, right? You check in to see with the different members of the council, right? If anybody has different things that they want to share during the meeting, right? So you have an informal discussion with the members of the council. And you ask, is there anybody who wants to share certain information during the meeting? Some person might say, yes, we need to have a discussion about the proposed budget for this charity event. Another person may say, yes, I want to talk about the tentative venues for this event, right? Some person might say, yes, I have some ideas for what could be the possible charity event that we are planning. So you're making note of all of this because you know that these are potential speakers that you're going to include on your agenda, right? Now, now the thing is, what is going to happen when you use this process, you're gonna be given a lot of information by different persons. So maybe you start off by saying, okay, I'm going to send out my feelers and see if there is anyone who is interested in contributing to the meeting, right? So that I can start writing up my agenda. And you may get a lot of responses. Maybe 15, 16 people say that, hey, I have this to talk about. I have that to talk about. I have this to talk about. Now that now puts a little responsibility, a larger responsibility on you, because now what you have to do is take all of these suggestions put forward by members and go through it to see which of these ideas are more relevant, right? So you continue refining that process until you come up with certain topics, right, that you think are more relevant for this meeting. And those are the topics you will include in the agenda. Okay. Now, what happens is that sometimes the leader of the meeting or the person who called the meeting, they may not want to be responsible for discussing all the topics in the meeting, right? So what they will do is delegate responsibility to certain members, and that is what is included in the agenda. All right, so let's look at our meeting agenda. Here you see you have the date, time, the facilitator, the attendees, the location, the meeting type, right? And the action items are usually the items to be discussed during the meeting. So just like with the memo, a meeting agenda will have its own header. And the header will include the basic information, the date of the meeting, the time of the meeting, the location of the meeting, the facilitator of the meeting, who is the group, organization, or person facilitating this meeting. And of course, sometimes that is included in the header, and that is the list of attendees, right? So just like on a memo, remember that an agenda has a header as well, and that is the information you will include in the header. So again, you want to send out this meeting agenda to all participants the day before the meeting, with a reminder of the location, the time, the duration of the meeting, and the goals of the meeting. Let's look at the agenda items you will include in a meeting agenda, right? You place a heading on the agenda, and this should include the company name or the department name, right? Step 2 is where you type the date and time of the meeting. Now, this agenda is important because you are sending it out beforehand so people can make preparations right beforehand to be able to attend this meeting. Because if you're sending out this agenda before, then I know that I have to put aside the time to attend this particular meeting, and because the agenda states the date in advance and it gives me an idea of the time. The third thing you want to do is give the meeting a topic. What type of meeting is it? So you're specifying again that this is a student council meeting, and this is the meeting to plan the charity event, the proposed charity event. And this is usually a single sentence, right? And that single sentence gives a general indication of what the meeting is about, okay? Then you name the meeting facilitator. This is very important because it shows that you or the person you have designated is the one that will take responsibility for the smooth functioning of the meeting, right? So what is the role of the facilitator in this particular agenda? When you write the name of the facilitator, what it does, the facilitator helps to keep the meeting on time, right? If other participants are interrupting a speaker, the facilitator will be there to tell the persons who are disrupting that they should give the speaker the time frame to finish. And then, of course, if the meeting permits, we will have more discussions. So you need to name the facilitator in your agenda as well. Step 5, you list invitees, right? Now, there are specific people, right, that you will invite to this meeting, right? So who are the list of people who are expected to come to the meeting? This is important, right? And you need to include this in the agenda, because in as much as you are putting the list of invitees, you will also make note of those who are absent from the meeting as well. So why would you include the list of invitees? Because the list of invitees is an official record that you are using to show your attempt to include all significant personnel. Now remember, the list of invitees is different from the list of attendees, right? The list of attendees are just everybody who is coming to the meeting, but you will have invited specific people to this meeting, and that is what you will include in the list of invitees. If you haven't invited specific persons to this meeting, then of course you don't have to include their names on your list of invitees. All right, then we move on to step 6. You indicate a roll call will be taken, right? You want to make sure that the persons you invited, they are there, right? And you want to indicate that a roll call will be taken. So if you're trying to, attempt to not attend the meeting, once you see that there is a roll call that will be taken and it's listed in the agenda, then as an invitee, you're going to make a concerted effort to attend the meeting. And all you have to do is type roll call, and that will be sufficient to cover that particular procedure. The 7th item is where you approve the minutes of the last meeting. So from every meeting, usually there is someone who takes the minutes, right? So you briefly go over what happened at the last meeting, and the minutes has to be approved from the previous meeting, and that must be included in the agenda. You are telling the persons who are attending the meeting that the minutes from the former meeting will be approved in this current meeting. Okay, and it's simply just a quick vote that happens during the meeting where everyone will approve the minutes. And then step 8 is where you discuss open issues, right? This is a period where attendees update everyone at the meeting about ongoing issues, right? You encourage further discussion. So in the agenda, the step 8 now is where you actually identify the speakers, the issues that the speakers will discuss, and the time frame allotted to each speaker, right? So it will all make sense when I show you an example of what a meeting agenda looks like, right? And of course, in step 9, you address any new business. You list any new business on the agenda in 2 or 3 bullet points. Now, this is the heart of the meeting, really, because this is what you're coming to discuss. Any new ideas or discussions, that is the crux of the meeting. So in step 9, there has to be a section for new business, right? So going back to the example with the student council, the new business for that meeting that will be included in the agenda is ideas for the upcoming charity event. Yes, and that will be the new business to discuss. All right, so the new business can be selected by the facilitator because this is really the reason for the meeting. So after everyone has sent forward their ideas, like we discussed earlier, the facilitator will sit down and go through all the different ideas that are being pitched to be discussed and included in the agenda. And the facilitator will choose out the topics to include under new business that is relevant to that specific meeting. So that is what will be included in the agenda, right? And then step 10 is where the meeting will be adjourned. And of course, in the agenda, you indicate on your agenda that you are officially closing the meeting at the end of the discussion of new business. And you will then ensure that everyone gets the opportunity to have shared what it is they wanted to discuss. You adjourn the meeting and then the meeting comes to an end, right? So I'm going to now share with you an example of a formal meeting agenda, right? So this is a template that I'm going to share with you now. And when you look at the template, it's different agenda templates that I'm sharing with you. And when you look at it, it's very easy to fill in the information for that particular template. So I'm going to stop sharing my PowerPoint with you now. And what I'm going to do is share my screen with you so that you can see the template that I'm referring to that gives you a look at what an agenda is. So when you watch this, this is your typical meeting agenda. This is the simplest template or format that you can follow when you're writing a meeting agenda. All right. So what you're seeing at the beginning in the header again, you have the name of your organization. Again, if this is stationery that is already prepared in advance by your school, by your company, it's going to have a logo, that fancy stuff, the logo at the top of it. If perhaps you are writing this from scratch, like what we are doing now, then you know you have to include a header, and that is the name of the meeting, right? So what is the name of the meeting? You brainstorm, you come up with an idea as to what it is you want to name this meeting. Where are you going to have the meeting? If you are having it in school, of course, you're going to put the address at the school. But then, of course, there are different classrooms. So you're going to have to also include the room number. So I know if I'm attending a meeting at your school, right? I know the address and I also know the room number that I am heading to. You put the date of the actual meeting, the date that the meeting is supposed to take place. You put the time. Now we have this thing where we say we work with Trini time. No. You're using the time identified in the meeting agenda, and that's when you are expected to be there at this meeting. So the time gives everyone an indication when this meeting is about to start. And of course, you may have more than one facilitator, right? And so you can list the name of the facilitator or facilitators, and you put all of that in the header, and you have completed your header for your meeting agenda. All right. Now, when you look at the agenda items, right? Agenda items are very straightforward. You know what your meeting is about. Okay, so you know that this is a charity event, and the purpose of the meeting is to discuss activities for the upcoming charity event. Okay, so the agenda, so this is where you start now discussing the time frame for each speaker, the agenda item description, and the location. All right. Some people will swap out location and also put the name of the person who is providing the information. Okay. So for each agenda item, it must have a time frame. So if I was there, if I was one of the speakers who was chosen to share information at this meeting, and you are now writing up a meeting agenda, you would have allotted a certain time frame for me to share my information. So let's say it's about, I've been given 5 minutes to share my information. So of course, you're going to put the start time for my meeting, for my discussion. It starts at 11 a.m. and the end of my discussion will end at 11:05 a.m. So you put that there. So when you send this out, someone looking at this agenda will know that this person is, that I am only speaking for 5 minutes, right? It helps me as well as the speaker, okay, to understand that I'm only allotted 5 minutes to speak. And because the next person will be starting their discussion immediately after my discussion, I know I have to stay within my time frame. Because if I don't stay within my time frame, I'm going to infringe on the time for the next speaker. And that is the purpose why you put that there. It helps everyone to stay on track, right? So after you've put in the time frame, you give a brief description of what I will be discussing. Okay, so let's say that my contribution to this meeting is about proposed venues for charity event. Then that is what you can put in as the description. A discussion of the proposed venues for the charity event. Okay, so that is going to be the description that you will use in the agenda for me. Now, as you can see here, there is location, right? I usually like to swap this out and put in the person's name. Okay, now to me, the person's name is more important than location, because we already know where this is going to take place. This is going to take place at your school in a particular room. So we don't need to be redundant by including the location again. I would suggest putting in the person's name so that you will know that I am scheduled to start at 11, what I am talking about, and you also know who is presenting on that information. And you follow this format for every single step. Okay, so you do it for every speaker who is attending this event. And this is a very simple agenda, right? So already when you send this out, anybody looking at this know who is speaking, the time frame they are speaking for, and the person who is speaking on this particular topic. All right, so this is one of the simplest agenda that you can use. This is a template that you can use just to fill in the basic information when writing an agenda. All right, so let's have a look at another one. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to pull up another agenda so that you can see the different types of agendas that are there. So let's look at agenda for maybe a book club, right? Let's say you have a book club at your school, right? And this is more of an informal meeting, really. And you want now to ensure that every person who is scheduled to attend this meeting has a copy of the agenda, right? So look at this meeting for a book club. This is a template. Again, in the header, you have the basic information, you have the location, you have the date, you have the time, right? And then you go down and you're looking at the topics to be discussed. And you notice the format for this one is different because this is more of an informal meeting, but you're sending this out to give everybody an idea as to what the meeting will be about. Okay, so for the book club, you have the introduction. The meeting leader, of course, will welcome the attendees. The name of the book that will be selected for discussion, right? The attendees now will give their own summary of the book that is up for discussion, right? You discuss some of the notes, you respond to any questions, and then in area 4, you see there is a prediction of the next selection. What is the next book that is going now to be selected for the book club? And then, of course, the meeting goals, the reading goals will be set. When will be the next meeting? Okay, so this is more of an informal agenda. And you notice that even if it's an informal agenda, again, it is structured in such a way where it keeps the meeting on track. So when you see this agenda, you know what is the topic for the meeting and how the meeting is going to unfold when you look at the agenda, right? Let's look at one final example. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I'm going to share one more example with you all. And this is one for a very formal meeting. So if your school or an organization is using an agenda and submitting an agenda, of course, this is the formal agenda, right? This is your very formal meeting agenda, and it includes everything we previously discussed, right? So you have the name of your organization, the name of your school. In the header, you want to include the meeting details, right? You have the date, the time, the location, right? You may even want to include a phone number or even your website in the agenda, because this is something that is being sent out to everybody. All right, so there is information. It's a way of now branding your organization, so you can include that information in the header for your agenda. Now, once you have included that information in the header for your agenda, you have the opening, and the opening is the introduction of the meeting and the agenda. So this is when it's going to be called to order. You have the list of attendees, and that is listed in the agenda as well. You have the agenda approval, and that is where members will vote to approve the agenda. Is everybody okay with this agenda, right? Because some people may feel as their contributions was left out. You leave room open for that small discussion as well, right? And then you distribute the previous meeting minutes. This is where the meeting minutes will be approved, the meeting minutes from the previous meeting. you have to seek the approval during this meeting. So you include that in the agenda, letting attendees know that the minutes from the previous meeting will be approved in this meeting, right? And then of course you discuss any old business. Say you had your last meeting and there is information from the last meeting that have yet to be resolved or completed, right? From your last meeting, you gave them time frames for them to action certain things, and you told them when we meet at our next meeting, we are going to now end that kind of business. So they're supposed to come with an update. So you discuss that and you include that in the agenda, letting everyone know that all the business will be discussed. And then you move on now to the crux of this agenda, and that is the discussion of new business at hand, right? That is followed by other items and conclusions. So we discuss any outstanding matters that have gone undiscussed, and of course the conclusion. And then you put who the meeting, how the agenda was approved by, a signature, and then you print the name. All right, so let's have a look at this again. This is your typical formal meeting agenda. This is what you will include in your agenda, right? So this is the information you will include in the agenda, and the previous document that I first showed you, that is the format that you will use. So once you have decided who is the opening, the attendance, the agenda approval, the distribution, previous meeting minutes, the approval of the previous meeting minutes, the old business, the new business, and the other items and discussion, you choose a nice format, and whether it is something as simple as just filling in the information under each item like this. So you have the opening, who will be opening, the time, the name of the person who will be opening, the list of attendees for 3, you list out your attendees, the gender approval, you list that out as 4, you distribute the previous meeting minutes, you state that in your agenda that you will be distributing the previous meeting minutes. Then of course 4 will be all the business, right? And 5 is where you can now again use the time for the format I showed you before, where we show the time frame for each speaker, the description, and the speaker for new business, and the other items and conclusion, right? So this is the main document here that one can use. And of course, there is this other one that I showed you. I'm just going to quickly go back to it. And that one is how you really format your agenda, okay? So when you do it like that, it helps you now to keep your meeting on track. So I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to go back again to the previous one that I showed you, and you will see again the way you can format your agenda, including that information. So here are your agenda items again, right? So if you were discussing, like I stated, from the previous document, in the previous document, you had the opening, right? So you will have the agenda item description, opening, what time the opening is supposed to start, what time it's supposed to end, who is the person giving the opening. Under that, you will then have the attendance, right? So you list the attendees under the area facilitator here. You list all the attendees, and under that you have the agenda approval. Of course, that is your second agenda item. So you just list here agenda approval, and if you want, you can give it a time frame again, because you don't want to spend too long on this gender approval. So that should just be a few minutes because again, that is a vote. So you put a time frame, you keep everything on track, right? And again, you move on to the distribute, you approve the meeting minutes from the last meeting. Again, you include that as an agenda description. And again, you can put a time and who is the person responsible for that, who is the person who will be calling for the vote. Is it the facilitator? Is it the secretary? You list that person's name here as well. And again, you go back and you use your previous template. You look at the old business, what old business is there that is outstanding and that has to be discussed. So when you go to and you look at your old business, you will be seeing now that the old business is another meeting agenda item description. So old business, it could just be 2 speakers who will be speaking on old business. So you have old business, and under that you have the name of the speakers who will be discussing old business at the side here, and how long you have to give them a particular time frame for that as well. And then for new business, you follow the same format. What is the new business that will be discussed? Again, you put the time frame for each speaker that will be speaking on new business, and then you are coming close to the end of your agenda. After new business, you have any concluding matters, and the concluding matters will be, of course, to discuss any outstanding business. And of course, you can also list in this the next date for your meeting. So essentially, you take any information that you have, and this is the way it is reader friendly to position it in this particular format. Because when you look at it at this format, you're seeing here that the agenda items are described, the time frame is given, and the names of the speakers, so the delegates responsible for the agenda description, they are also identified as well, right? So there are different types of agendas. That's the most important thing. You choose a format or a template that is specific to the type of meeting that you are having. The main one that I discussed with you guys today is if you're having a formal business meeting, but then you saw that the agenda changes. If you are having now maybe a club, a meeting for a club, right? It may not be as specific as the one you have in front of you, right? But the most important takeaway from today is that if you are preparing, if you are having a meeting, ensure that you have an agenda, right? It helps everyone to stay on track. And the most important parts of that agenda, of course, is the header. And then you decide how it is you're going to lay out your agenda, again, depending on the type of meeting that you're having. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing now. I'll see that we are running out of time. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to respond to any questions that you guys may have on what I discussed about discussed on the agenda. Any questions?
No, miss.
So do you understand everything about the agenda?
Yes, miss.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that an agenda is a simple document to write?
Yeah, miss, once you know the format and where the agenda is about, it should be easy to write.
Excellent. So that's a great answer. Once you know what your meeting is about, once you have chosen your theme, right, and your topic, then that is what helps you to format your agenda really, right? Because you may not use the format that I showed you for a business meeting agenda for maybe a team meeting, right? For a team meeting, it might be a little bit more informal. So of course you may use an agenda that is suited to that particular meeting, right? But again, the most important thing is that you create an agenda. All right?
Yes, miss.
Okay, great. Any questions coming out of Palo Seco? Palo Seco, are you still with me?
Yeah. No, we understand everything so far.
Okay, you all understand everything. Great. So what about the others? What about, I see we have some students here as well from Williamsville Secondary. Are you all understanding everything?
Yes, miss, we understand everything. It was pretty straightforward, no questions.
Okay, great. I like to hear that. All right, so we have some students as well from Superior West Secondary School. We have about 5 students. Any questions from Superior West? Superior West?
No, miss.
Okay, great. So I'm glad that you guys understood the agenda. It's a very straightforward document. Okay, so what I'm going to do, if any of you would like copies of these templates, I'll make arrangements afterwards to see how I can get them to you all. Okay, I just don't want to upload it in the chat, but
Dr. James, I actually copied the email addresses so that you can email it directly to them if you would like.
okay, great. So I'll make note of the email addresses and I will send it out to you all so that you can have the templates that you can work with on your own by writing out your own agendas and of course your memo. So it's 2 very straightforward documents, right? And with the advent of information, you can find templates for any one of these documents online, right? So if you are looking for a template for an agenda, maybe for a team meeting, you can place that information online and you get the templates. But you need to know beforehand, like what was said coming out from some of you. You need to know what the meeting is going to be about. First of all, identify the theme of your meeting. And then what is going to be the topic of your meeting, right? And once you have identified the theme and the topic, then you can get information now to fill in for the agenda, right? Going back to the memo, right? The memo again is another straightforward document, right? You send out your memo and again, there are a number of templates, but again, you need to know that when you're writing your memo, you have a simple introduction, and then your body now expands on what you would have written in the introduction, and then you have your conclusion. No closing, right? So the most important thing is to understand the format for each document, and then you fill in that information, and you have your memo, you have your agenda. Yeah? Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay?
All right, good afternoon. Good morning once again. Well, I have to thank you. I'm sorry to be premature with this. I do have to thank you on behalf of the students for all of the information you provided and the assistance with this aspect of the English A exam paper. I'm very, very grateful for this, for all that you've done for our girls. It's just that now we have to, they have their lunchtime now, and they have some other activities that they have to go off to because today is an activity day for this school. All right, it's not something that I knew in advance. So I just have to close up shop now. All right, but I'm thanking you very, very much for the information and for a comprehensive breakdown of the components. Okay, Ms. James, thank you.
You're welcome.
All of this information.
I will definitely make these templates available to you so that you can review it later on at a time of your convenience. And again, you know, this is just a little insight into what you will get in terms of the teaching here at COSTAATT. As Ms. Edwards mentioned, I am a proud graduate of COSTAATT. So again, for any of you who will be interested in learning more about the courses that are available at COSTAATT, feel free to go through the chat and access the COSTAATT link. Again, it is www.costatt.edu.tt. All right. So again, it was a pleasure having each of you, and there is also the link for the COSTAATT Ken Gordon School. You can access that link as well in the chat. There are a variety of interesting courses that I think will pique your interest. So the weekend is coming up. Just take your time, go through both links and peruse the website and see if there is anything that interests you. Okay? So again, it was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure meeting all of you. I hope you were able to follow and understand all that I shared with you today. And please have a safe and productive rest